Good morning. If we could all find our seats, I'll call the meeting of the board of the MTA to order. Let's begin with members of the public who have already registered and are ready to comment. Mr. Marino, would you call them?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. First, a quick announcement. Your safety is our first priority. The following are procedures to follow in the event of an emergency. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell exit A just across from the main hallway or stairwell E down the hall past the elevator lobby. Notify emergency personnel if you need assistance. Automated external defibrillators for use by trained personnel are located in the main hall just past the elevators. To remind all the public speakers, you have 2 minutes per speaker, and I will remind you when you hit the 2-minute mark to summarize your remarks. Thank you. The first speaker is Seth Rosenberg. Mr. Rosenberg will be followed by Ed Delgado.
My name is Seth Rosenberg, and I'm a New York City subway operator, a proud member of Local 100, a shop steward, and a revolutionary socialist. I was originally planning to speak against all fare hikes. We know that working class New Yorkers are struggling and already pay too much for a subway system that's falling apart. But now it's clear that Governor Cuomo is pushing congestion pricing, and he has Mayor de Blasio and the Democratic Party on board. Make no mistake, congestion pricing is just Cuomo's shell game, moving an attack from one sector of the working class to another. Congestion pricing is a regressive tax. It will disproportionately hurt workers in the area who have no other choice but to drive to and from work. Middle and upper class individuals always have more flexibility and choice. Why is it that all of Cuomo's plans to save the subway target working people, while absurdly rich companies like Amazon are offered billions in tax incentives? This is especially ironic, since the subway crisis was caused not only by decades of neglect by politicians like Cuomo, but also by Wall Street, the banks, and rich investors who are sucking the system dry with billions paid to them by the MTA every year, servicing the $40 billion debt. We say no more. Make the capitalists pay for the subway crisis they caused. Tax the rich, tax every stock trade and move by the financial industry in New York City. Enforce a moratorium on MTA debt payments, at least until the subway system gets back on its feet. The bondholders are the same people who were bailed out in the '08 financial crisis with our tax money. They profit every day from the subway system's running, so let them sacrifice for a change. Cuomo, the politicians, and the MTA Board want to make the working class pay for this crisis. We can stop them, but it will take a united effort, an alliance of transit workers and riders. No fare hikes, no congestion pricing, stop the attacks on the region's workers, make the rich pay. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ed Delgado, who will be followed by Trammell Thompson. Ed Delgado, are you here? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, buddy. Good morning. I'm glad to be here. So I worked for the federal government for close to 30 years as an investigator in fair housing and did compliance around ADA issues. But that's not why I'm here. The reason I'm here is that just when I was about to retire, I lost much of my vision. And for the first year, I wouldn't leave the house. My wife finally said, I'm gonna leave you if you don't get yourself together. To a great extent, e-hail helped me get my freedom back. And we need this program, not only for those that are already in it, but we need to expand it because there are so many people stuck in their homes because they can't get around. Because unfortunately, the MTA does not have enough elevators, does not have enough accessibility ramps. And I really would like to strongly push that e-hail be expanded. And I also like to to thank the gentleman that came before me that said, tax the rich.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. The next speaker is Trammell Thompson, who will be followed by Jason Pinheiro.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trammell Thompson. I'm a New York City train conductor. I'm also the founder of a group called Progressive Action. I want to talk about the discrimination and racial culture of New York City Transit. A little bit of history. In the 1900s, blacks was only allowed to be cleaners in the 1900s before it was New York City Transit. Coincidentally, today, the only title that starts at an inferior wage progression is cleaners. I want to know why is that today? The history showed that blacks was only allowed to be cleaners in the early 1900s, and today, 100 years later, cleaners start at an inferior wage progression than any other title in New York City Transit. Last year, I did a FOIA request regarding discipline, and one thing I found interesting in this is that Long Island Railroad train conductors was opening up doors outside the platform and was getting reprimands. In New York City Transit, we would not get a reprimand for opening up doors for this serious offense. Why is that? When I looked up the diversity of New York City Transit and Long Island Railroad have a 64% Caucasian workforce alone. New York City Transit have a 77% minority workforce alone. Is that the reason why we get punished more egregiously than Long Island Railroad for the same exact offense? And just recently, 2 weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, some Muslim brothers, construction flaggers, which are also conductors, was told to cut off their beds or go back to their tools as regular train conductors. That sounds like a father telling his child, if you don't do what I say, go to your room. We should not be operating like that in 2019. You guys can make accommodations, get other type of equipment for these people so they won't have to violate their religion. It goes on too much. The home of plantation justice,
Mr. Thompson, please summarize your remarks.
Resides downstairs. We need change. Mr. Byford, I'm with you on your fourth priority. I'm waiting for it to kick in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. The next speaker is Jason Pinheiro, who will be followed by Mary Parson Lavelle.
Good morning, board. This month I'm going to be nice. But one thing I want to make clear, I don't support no fare and toll increases. Why? Because people with disabilities who often use accessory have to pay the full $2.75 instead of $1.35 like every other person who receives the half-fare Metro card. And especially, I want to thank Veronica Vanderpool that she took of her time to respond to my tweet that I sent it regarding graffiti in our subway cars. It is time that we stop this nonsense. And most of all, if we pay our fare, why not people don't pay the fares in the subways when we take Long Island Railroad and we take Metro North? I will be kindly to ask Philip and Cassie to enforce fair payment within their systems. And if the passenger doesn't have the proper fare, they should be let out of the train because they don't have the proper fare. Because it is not fair that I pay my portion and other people don't. It's not fair to have a fare toll increase. So people, let's say no to fare and toll increases, and let's treat people with disabilities who use accessory as brothers and sisters of ours, not a minority. So that's all I have to say for this month.
Thank you, Mr. Pinheiro. The next speaker is Mary Parson Lavelle, who will be followed by Christopher Greif.
Good morning. My name is Mary Parson Lavelle. I'm the chair of Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. I'd like to express my sorrow for yesterday's catastrophe and also to commend President Eng, Long Island Railroad staff, and first responders for their quickness yesterday in addressing the catastrophe. Last month at the board meeting, we heard Scott Reckler talk about how the current culture has engendered public distrust of the MTA. There was discussion of how MTA's culture had suppressed innovation and competition. Jan Oliba talked about new methods that are achieving good results. Long Island Railroad's traditional culture and procurement methods have resulted in costly failures. Long Island failures include the DE locomotives, which you can see on page 2 of your handout, the Progress Rail PR-20B prototypes, and the current freight locomotive procurement RFP 6263, which is tainted by illegal favoritism and restrictive specifications that suppress competition. As a follow-up to this board's new momentum, only a fair and open competition for the cleanest switcher locomotives will provide the MTA with optimum product value and long-term cost effectiveness. It is imperative that you restart the Long Island Railroad's Tier 4 locomotive procurement as an open, fair procurement for the cleanest Tier 4 switcher locomotives. The MTA chairman can make this happen, and you can see that on page 5 of your handout. The authority needs this transparency as a stepping stone toward a new culture. You need this financially to ensure the procurement of best value and viable competitive products. You need this open competition to acquire proven air quality technologies that passenger and freight services require on Long Island. And you need to fulfill the commitment to provide workers, residents, and passengers the cleanest possible air to breathe. More than a year has passed since the Long Island Railroad's mechanical
Please summarize your remarks.
and procurement departments released this 6263 procurement, which was prepared with STV consultant, who used to be Long Island Railroad's chief mechanical officer, which you can see on page 6. What we're asking is that in light of this board's
Please summarize your remarks.
this RFP has become an insubordinate fraud, and we ask you to take action. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Christopher Greif. Mr. Greif will be followed by Jessica Murray.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christopher Greif, member of the New York City Transit Riders Council. I want to remind one thing. I want to say my prayers to go out for the Long Island Railroad customers, and I want to thank for the excellent job was done. I'm glad we do have some limited service during rush hour, and people were pleased this morning. But today I'm also here to remind a couple of things. One, the e-help accessory vehicle needs to be increased more because a lot of our disability families and seniors need that. And I could tell you that there are companies outside here called Accessible Dispatch, and other companies can actually help getting more people to travel from A to B even faster and safe and much safer. Also to remind, because of the fare concerns, we need to remind that accessibility, seniors and disabilities cannot afford the fare increase. As the young lady saying behind me, second my emotion, thank you. Very important also, we need to support very strongly the Fast Forward program. We need to support the elevators, not putting them down. We need support the elevators in all boroughs so people and seniors, disabled can go somewhere fun, somewhere interesting, and maybe to go to a baseball game. Between the Mets, the Yankees, the Nets, or the Knicks, we need to have a little more accessibilities. Thank God Long Island Railroad has the Long Island Cares, which has been working pretty well, and it is still being worked on even more strongly and more upgrades and more ideas. So as I said again, which I have 30 seconds, I know, Rob, I got you back there. Please make sure, guys, when we do this fair thing, please let's make it clear for the record, and news stations can get it very clearly, not giving wrong information, because we are panicking passengers and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greif. The next speaker is Jessica Murray, who will be followed by H.P. Schroyer.
Good morning. One of the first things President Byford did to address delays was to get to the root cause in order to have an honest accounting. Now we'd like you to give us an honest accounting of subway stations, especially the accessible ones. The conventional wisdom is that the subway has 472 stations, but lines converging in station complexes are counted multiple times. No other transit system counts their stations the same way. So saying that we have the most accessible stations is like comparing apples to apple slices. If you remove the duplicate stations and halfway accessible stations, Chicago beats us. We've heard that key stations were chosen because they are high traffic and geographically important, and the word key brings several stations to mind. Times Square, Grand Central, and Columbus Circle. Those 3 stations, however, are counted as 10 under the key station agreement. I recently conducted an analysis of the key and non-key accessible stations that you can read at bit.ly/key stations. I assigned a percentage to lines and complexes counted as unique. So 100 key stations is more like 78. But 3 of those stations are in Staten Island, even though Staten Island stations are not included in the total of 472. When you account for station complexes, most of which have 1 street to mezzanine elevator, and adjust for a percentage of halfway accessible stations, we have fewer than 90 accessible stations today, not 118. The system is only currently 20% accessible. After reports that accessible stations would be cut, there was some defense of the next 50-station plan. But when removing station complexes and half stations, we'll still end up with only 36 new accessible stations. There are claims that the people ask for network coverage, and the 2-station-away idea gives them that. But that goal can still be achieved with fewer than 50 stations. People are still not going to travel 2 subway stations away by wheelchair or foot if they have difficulty walking. The only people who weighed in on that idea were the ones who could be in this room. There are thousands more whose voices have not been heard. We urge you to only count unique stations. It would make the system less confusing. It would make accountability more transparent. It would make progress on all accessible.
Please summarize your remarks.
Easier to track. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is H.P. Schroyer, who will be followed by Michael Howard.
Good morning. My name is H.P. Schroyer, a World War II veteran. Since I first requested giving veterans the same discount as seniors, your failure to do so cost many $45,000 during their lifetime. The city has lost 35% of its veterans' population. Veterans contribute to the economic vitality of the city and why firms like Amazon wanted to locate here. You say you don't have the money, yet if you dedicate, as we suggested, 2 cents from every fare, it enables you to give the discount without any loss of income, yet you ignore this proposal. You say you don't have the money. There are 2 state bills which give all veterans a discount, bills which could provide the money needed, yet you make no effort to help pass them. While you made no effort, we have. With the help of the American Legion, the VFW, and a majority of states and legislators, these bills are now in committee. This is a nonpartisan issue which the public supports. You say you don't have the money, yet Suffolk County and Albany have a veterans discount, and the mayor and city council will join them. Yet this board and the governor refuses to. Is that the way the MTA thinks out of the box? Attached is a cost analysis, which proves without any loss of income, provides for a veterans discount.
Please summarize your remarks.
For the extra 60 elevators so badly needed for the disabled and seniors. Please explain to my fellow veterans and the public why you don't think a veteran service to country is worth 2 cents. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Michael Howard, who will be followed by Miriam Fisher.
Good morning. My name is Michael Howard. My title is We Won, Amazon Lost and Walk Away. I just wanted to say that I'm glad we won against Amazon for them to walk away, because they understand we're transparent on everything they would damage, like the subway system, housing, schools, and other things we need to save ourselves. Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo can boo-hoo all they want after they made a deal with the devil, Jeff Bezos, aka the sexual predator, on Friday, March 8th, which is my birthday. I will be making my first speech at Queens College at the legislative breakfast from 8:30 to 11 a.m. If any of y'all live or work in the neighborhood, please stop by the Queens College to support me from your heart, you know. And right now I'm just rehearsing to get my speech together, you know. And by the way, it's best to have it's best for more buses to have digital box navigation systems. It needs to come in fast and handy. The buses from 2008 till this year that doesn't have them, because I seen a couple of Queens depots don't have them yet, like Casey Stengel, Jamaica.
Mr. Howard, please summarize your remarks.
Queens Village, they all need those type of boxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Miriam Fisher, who will be followed by Omar Vera.
I'm speaking as somebody with an invisible disability, with a bad back, partly caused by being hit by a taxi when I was in a coma and didn't work for several years, and have permanent disabilities. Supporting the need for accessible subways and looking beyond an absolute number of how many subways we have compared to cities with a lower population like Chicago, but the percentage of people who are able, with disabilities and other physical needs and strollers, to use public transportation with elevators, escalators, and ramps. I am a supporter of congestion pricing, and some of the issues that also need to be addressed are the congestion of traffic, pollution, and safety, and cities that have supported congestion pricing have a greater diminution of accidents, congestion, have opened up public spaces for all by taking out parking spaces, widening the sidewalks, and making the city livable for people and not for car-dominated cities. There are many sources of funding besides congestion pricing, and I think the mayor and the governor have already talked about exemptions for people with disabilities, including exemptions for people of low income who need cars to drive to work. I think those are being addressed. Most car owners are middle and high income, and they have created some of the congestion, as along with the Uber and Lyft.
Please summarize your remarks.
100,000 dominating the city. I also want to bring up the issue of the transit deserts, and instead of adding more subways, thinking of low light rail as they have in Europe.
Ms. Fisher, please summarize your remarks.
And adding greater numbers and greater geographic areas to the need for mass transit.
Thank you. The next speaker is Omar Vera, who will be followed by Maria Henderson.
Good morning, MTA Board. Month of February, full board meeting. I have a huge, ambitious plan for how the MTA can modernize the entire system, not just New York City Transit. Just have fares like this. For starters, this fare change every 2 years. I guess I've said this repeatedly, has got to go. No more increases. Instead, we should decrease the base fare to $2 and have a veterans discount about $1, $1.50, as H.P. Shorter suggests. Because they have served almost every other major American city has a veterans discount for their transit systems. We should implement ours. We shall. And speaking of which, Fast Forward is going by very well, and it needs to ramp up to the levels of the TTC increase in Toronto. But in any case, so the Omni card, the name is a little odd, but we're willing to see how it gets implemented across the entire system. Because remember, we're the Empire State. Our motto is Excelsior, ever upward, and we should always strive to be the best. And that means modernizing everything around us. And that's the way to go. And I know that Metro North also controls a section of Amtrak along the Hudson line. We should invite them one day to see if we can have faster cell service up north, places like Albany, Buffalo, Chicago, and even like Toronto and Montreal. Because 10 hours, because I rode the Amtrak, and 10 hours it seems a bit too long for something that's like less than 400 miles. But in any case, we also in addition to fares, we also need new subway lines, to the places that are hardly served, like Kings Plaza, Brooklyn. And as for everything else, it's too much to explain in just 2 minutes. So this plan shall be created gradually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. The next speaker is Maria Henderson, who will be followed by Deborah Elliott.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Henderson. I'm the Director of Communications for Councilmember Eudinas Rodriguez, who's the chair of the New York City Council's Committee on Transportation. I'm just here today to say that New York City has a world-class subway system, and that we need to continue investing in that infrastructure through the Fast Forward plan, funding the Fast Forward plan. However, I'm here to just say on behalf of the council member that he is adamantly against any type of fare hikes. This will only the burden should not be on the strap hangers and the bus riders and people utilizing mass transit in New York City. It should come from other sources, such as comprehensive congestion pricing plan that we're hoping will get passed in Albany, as well as a millionaire's tax should still be on the table. And leveraging other sources, other resources, public-private partnerships, being innovative and creative, and finding additional revenue to make sure that our infrastructure for our subway system and our bus system will continue to thrive and be able to help everyone travel throughout the city and throughout the 5 boroughs. I just want to keep that brief today, in that I hope that the board can come up with some other innovative and creative thinking so that we do not burden the working class and low-income New Yorkers that take the subway and the bus system every day. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. The next speaker is Deborah Elliott, who will be followed by Lisa Daglian.
Good morning. My concern is with the e-hail. Now, most of the time, the drivers are rude, disrespectful, and that's kind of sad, because when you're disabled and you're a senior and you're in the vehicle, it's a bit intimidating when your driver doesn't show compassion. I work with disabled people, and they're supposed to get little extra TLC because they disabled. And my other concern is with the e-hail app. I've called Miss Griseldes Cepeda many times, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, GRICELDA-CESPEDES, and she said she was responsible for the e-hail app. And she never got back with me. She said her secretary will call me. I never heard from her since. And I'm just interested in getting the e-hail app. With my disability, I would fit the criteria, because I have multiple disabilities and I have sporadic muscles problem. So that'll help me when I have to go to the doctor unexpectedly. Please respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I'm sorry, Ms. Elliott. The next speaker is Lisa Daglian, who will be followed by Sasha Blair Goldenson.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. We also mourn the loss of life in yesterday's tragic crash and urge expediting the elimination of grade crossings, which we think could prevent future incidents of this nature. Today you'll be voting on a fare hike, though, which was postponed from last month. Certainly a lot has changed since last month and even from Monday. But what has not changed is the dire financial situation of our entire transit network and the need to raise fares to prevent service cuts. From all accounts, you'll be voting on option 1, which would leave the base fare for the subway at $2.75 and eliminate bonuses for any cards over $5.50, a round trip on the subway. Weekly and monthly cards would also go up. Since the majority of commuters, the regular riders of this system, take advantage of the discounts, their fares will effectively go up, while the occasional user and tourists will not feel any pain. We don't think that's in the best interest of everyday riders. We do appreciate that Access-a-Ride users won't see a fare increase, and we support the expansion of e-hail. At the same time, we wonder why the vote was delayed if this option was on the table from the beginning, costing millions of dollars. Fares on the Long Island Railroad and Metro North are also slated to go up, but now supposedly with a cap of up to $460 a month. That's more palatable than $500 a month. We still believe there should be a discount for commuters who purchase a monthly pass and MetroCard combo. And even though Metro North and Long Island Railroad customers will be paying more, they seemingly don't have a seat at the newly proposed Regional Transit Committee. That's a wrong that needs to be righted. The 10-point proposal made yesterday by the mayor and governor would limit fare increases to inflationary increases of 2% a year, making it a known quantity and hopefully meaning less storm and drying every year. We all know that money needs are great and funding options are not, and new sustainable funding sources are critical to keeping the system on track. Obviously, no one wants a fare hike, but the alternative of service cuts is even worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dagley. The next speaker is Sasha Blair Goldenson, who will be followed by Colin Wright.
Good morning, board. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sasha Blair Goldenson. I'm with the Elevator Action Group of Rise and Resist. Elevators are for everyone. That's our motto, but that's also a really important thing for everyone to be thinking about. Elevators are not just for people in wheelchairs, right? They're for everyone. They're for families with strollers, tourists with luggage, delivery workers with hand carts, MTA workers themselves who need it to take out the garbage, to do construction. All these people use elevators and use ramps. We need to build them, and we are very encouraged by Andy's arrival and the Fast Forward plan. We absolutely believe that him and Alex are great advocates for accessibility, and we appreciate that so much. But there's a limit to what they can do without the governor and the mayor's support. We need those people to get on board and make those things a priority also and fund the program, because those 50 elevators in 5 years will be a great start to get our city up to a little ways along the way to the standard that other cities and other countries around the world have built for accessibility. So let's support Andy and Alex and get the mayor and the governor on board, because they have the power to actually change this. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Colin Wright, who will be followed by Joseph Rappaport.
Thanks. Good morning, Colin Wright from Transit Center. I'm here to echo Sasha and also to reiterate testimony I gave on Monday's Transit Committee meeting. Regardless of whether you receive $40 billion, $30 billion, or any other figure for Fast Forward, this agency must allocate enough funding to allow for at least 50 newly accessible stations in the next 5 years. This is a first step in a down payment on system-wide accessibility by 2034. As Sasha said, riders will never see a fully accessible subway unless this agency prioritizes accessibility rather than treating it as an optional feature when budget decisions must be made. Accessibility is not optional, it's essential. Please please re-enter settlement talks to agree to a binding legal commitment to your accessibility commitments. People with disabilities contend with the least accessible subway in the country. They struggle to pick up kids and to make it to work. Malaysia Goodson died 3 weeks ago. A colleague who uses Accessoride told me yesterday that she leaves home at 6:45 a.m. to make this meeting on time. I might leave at 6:45 a.m. to make it to Philadelphia. The bottom line is transit options for people with disabilities are not acceptable today. And 30 years after the ADA, access for hundreds of thousands of people must be your first priority. The mayor has come around to the conclusion that everyone else has long known. New York City needs congestion pricing, and the MTA needs new revenue. So all eyes are now on the state legislature, whose primary task is to fully fund your fast forward and capital plans. Then it's up to this agency to deliver on accessibility. And on a side note, regarding fare increases today, consider adjusting your financial year to more closely align with Albany's. It's odd to vote on fare increases without understanding the budget picture from the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. The next speaker is Joseph Rappaport, who will be followed by Anthony Drummond.
Good morning. I'm Joe Rappaport, the Executive Director of the Brooklyn Center for Independence of the Disabled. First, I'd like to thank you, the board and the MTA staff, for what we understand is your decision to keep the base fare and the Accessoride fare at $275. No one wants a fare hike, but as many of us testified, if you're going to raise the fare, at least do it fairly. We appreciate it. You've listened to us as you did in 2017. I know Accessoride riders and others who have a tough time scraping together the cash to ride the buses and subways will appreciate it as well. Thank you. We're here with another message. Governor Cuomo and the MTA must settle our civil rights lawsuits on subway accessibility and elevator maintenance. We can't wait for vague promises that if congestion pricing comes through, then you'll make the stations accessible. Governor Cuomo, it's your MTA, your stations. Make them accessible and safe now. That means a legally binding subway accessibility plan, similar to the one that your father agreed to in the mid-1980s. Remember that 4 decades ago, a disability group sued the MTA over the lack of subway accessibility. Over the MTA's and Mayor Koch's objections, Governor Cuomo, Governor Mario Cuomo, settled that suit and agreed to make 100 key stations, or however number there are, accessible. Now, Governor Cuomo, Governor Andrew Cuomo, you must do the same thing to make the subway accessible. We commend President Byford for making it clear on Monday that his commitment to 50 accessible stations in the next capital program is rock solid. But we need an agreement so that no matter what happens with congestion pricing or a cannabis tax or some new MTA governance scheme, people with disabilities, people with strollers, older people can have the same access to the subways the rest of us take for granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rappaport. The next speaker is Anthony Drummond, who will be followed by Kevin Zeng.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Drummond. I am representing Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, and I'll be reading the testimony on his behalf to you all. So, good morning. My name is Eric L. Adams, and I'm Brooklyn Borough President, representing 2.6 million residents who ride and depend upon the New York City transit system to get to school, work, and various locations throughout our city. I am submitting testimony to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Board of Directors in regards to the challenges, reforms facing our system, and also the proposed fare and toll changes. In my last testimony to the board in December, I spoke to you opposing the proposed fare and toll increase that would impact our commuters who use the system daily. I mentioned that I would not support an increase in fares because many Brooklynites struggle to make ends meet. The fare and toll increase is especially egregious because New York City Transit is not only calling for a fare and toll increase, but also calling for service cuts in the bus and subway system. In addition, I was surprised by Governor Cuomo's announcement that L train would not be fully closed in April as originally planned after years of community input and discussion in order to make necessary repairs from the impact of Superstorm Sandy. There's no question that the Canarsie Tunnel needs repairs, but I'm asking the Board of Directors to increase their fiduciary responsibility to take more of an oversight role in this project to review the contract of the plan as it impacts not only the commuters who are riding the system, but also the businesses serviced by the L train, residents, and construction workers who will be repairing the tunnels. For example, concerns have been relayed to my office about the level of toxicity in the conduits from the silica that the construction workers and commuters could be exposed to as repairs are being done. In addition, I have concerns about the construction materials, particularly the polymer along the bench wall that will need to be disposed of. The question is, where are these materials going to be disposed, and how will the riding public be protected as these materials make their way throughout the enclosed subway system? These are major concerns that must be addressed immediately. And, in light of the Governor and Mayor de Blasio's announcement of a 10-point plan to transform...
Mr. Drummond, if you can summarize your remarks, we'd appreciate it.
I will definitely do that.
Thank you.
We continue to advocate for a permanent and stable funding stream for the organization. I know the MTA is under intense pressure to carry out the services for the millions of commuters who use the system every day, but it is imperative that the stewardship of the organization stands true to its mission to preserve and enhance the quality of life and economic health of the region it serves throughout the cost-efficient provision of safe, on-time, reliable, and clean transportation services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond. The next speaker is Kevin Zeng, who will be followed by Matt Shotkin.
Hello, good morning to Frank Barrere and Philip Inc. My name is Kevin Zhang. I would like to request that the Freedom tickets and including Atlantic tickets needs a free transfer to MTA New York City Transit because all Long Island Railroad and Metro-North Railroad stations price are too expensive and the transfer is not free from MTA New York City Transit to Long Island Railroad and Metro-North Railroad stations. Atlantic tickets got installed already for Long Island Railroad since Wednesday, June 6, 2018, and is not free transfer to MTA New York City Transit. So now, I have to use a pay-per-ride MetroCards and unlimited MetroCards. Freedom tickets and including Atlantic tickets will be getting a free transfer from Long Island Railroad and Metro-North Railroad to MTA New York City Transit, and also getting a free transfer from MTA New York City Transit to Long Island Railroad and Metro-North Railroad, so that the Freedom tickets and including Atlantic tickets for Long Island Railroad and Metro-North Railroad stations price will be cheaper. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. The next speaker is Matt Shotkin.
Good morning, Andrew and the rest of the board. I have a couple of comments about congestion pricing. Number one, the Daily News headlines today. Tolls ahead. Blas the Clown Cuomo strikes his price deal on congestion pricing to save subways. The subways don't need to be saved. They break down occasionally, but they don't need fixing. And transforming the MTA from the AM New York is another headline. Cuomo, de Blasio back overall plan, including congestion pricing to fix subways. Come on, what idiot wants to pay a toll to have to go through a bridge? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shotkin. Mr. Chairman, that was the last speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marino, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the February board meeting. As you can imagine, I need to start today by expressing to all of you that the board and the MTA family deeply mourns the loss of 3 individuals who lost their lives in a vehicle at the School Street crossing along the Long Island Railroad right-of-way last night. It was a terrible tragedy, and we all are saddened by it, and hope that that those injured enjoy a speedy recovery, and will keep the families of those who lost their lives in our thoughts. Accordingly, I'd like to ask a moment of silence in remembrance of those people who died last night. Thank you. To begin, I want once again to congratulate Andy Byford on all the progress we're seeing under the Subway Action Plan. We've now reduced the number of delayed trains by 10,000 or more every month for the past 5 consecutive months. So this isn't a one-time thing, it's a trend. Weekday on-time performance has gone up about 32% from January 2018 to January 2019. We're far from done, but thanks to Andy and the hardworking men and women of New York City Transit who work implementing our subway action plan, we've seen huge improvements in the subway system over the past year, and we thank them for it. As you, I think, know, Scott Reckler, a member of this board, has announced his resignation. So I want to take a moment to thank Scott for his dedicated service, especially commend him for his work as chair of our construction costs working group, which has laid a foundation for fundamental reform in the way we deal with procurements. I'd also like to introduce 2 new board members joining our ranks today, former FRA Administrator Sarah Feinberg and real estate executive and former MTA board member David Mack. They are no strangers to the work we do here, and we welcome them both. We have a lot on our agenda today, but I want to be clear up front about one of the most daunting challenges we've faced in decades. Today, the MTA is under significant financial stress. You've heard me express this before. We project an operating deficit of almost $500 million next year, growing to nearly $1 billion by 2022. As you know, today we'll vote on fare and toll increases critical to our efforts to avoid service reductions and other negative consequences. Monica Murray will soon describe our recommended proposal in more detail, but it should look familiar. Base fares will remain at $2.75 and single ride tickets at $3. We propose to eliminate the MetroCard bonus, to increase the 7-day pass by 3.1% and the 30-day pass by 5%. We're updating the proposal to better align with past precedent and increasing tolls for Easy Pass customers by 6.3%. And in order to keep the pre-existing, roughly comparable tolls and express bus fares, we're increasing those fares to approximately $6.75. These changes will bring in additional yearly revenue of $336 million a year, more than what we had built into our February financial plan. While this is important, let me stress it is not enough to fund our capital program or close our operating deficits. We know that increased funding alone won't solve all our problems. Just as urgent, we must fundamentally reform the MTA, and this chart shows some of the major initiatives we've been undertaking toward that end. Previously announced, we implemented a company-wide hiring freeze on all non-essential and non-represented employees. We established an executive committee to ensure that every vacant MTA job is still absolutely necessary before we hire anyone new to fill that position. Each of our operating agencies, as well as MTA headquarters and MTA Capital Construction, have been asked to identify $500 million in annual recurring savings. We're applying the same scrutiny to outside consultants and vendors by reducing their hourly rates by 10% across the board. And we're working to consolidate a slew of back-office functions within operations, between the Long Island Railroad and Metro-North in particular, as well as enterprise-wide. We're thrilled that the recommendations from Columbia and Cornell Engineering School deans and faculty allowed us to avert a full 15-month shutdown of the L Trains Canarsie Tunnel. As a result, I've asked these experts to look for innovative methods to improve construction on all other major capital projects we're currently undertaking. In addition, as part of our accelerated pursuit of continuous improvement and in the spirit of full accountability and transparency, this board will review and approve a series of aggressive but realistic performance targets for subways, buses, and commuter railroads. Through this new initiative, we'll set high performance standards and hold ourselves accountable for those standards and measure progress against them, because you cannot improve something you do not measure and consistently report on. We'll then report back to the board on all of these measures and our progress on a quarterly basis. The reason why is simple. We know we need to be accountable for our performance at the highest levels of management. No one's disputing that. In fact, we are all embracing it. And as I hope you can see, we're doing our part to make the MTA as efficient and effective as possible, cutting administrative costs, implementing cost-saving strategies, reaching out to our union partners, and working with our contractors to lower their costs. We undertake all this work with an eye toward another key goal, helping our funding partners feel comfortable doing their part by investing in the MTA and our indispensable transit network on which we all rely. The minutes of January's meeting have been distributed to all members. Are there any questions or corrections or omissions? Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you. In the spirit of greater transparency, which I hold up as an important tenet of both our audit committee and this group in general, there is a emerging concern I have about the way we're taking minutes. If you go through some of these sections of our minutes, I'll just cite some numbers, pages 8, 12, and 16, we have a phrase we use that basically says, see the audio and video testimony for board members' comments. Then other parts of our minutes, 28, 33, 34, we then go to length explaining board members' comments. I think it's inconsistent, and I'd like to figure out why we're doing that in different places.
We'll certainly look into that, Mr. Zuckerman, but I presume you have no specific changes you wish to make to the minutes that were reported in the book.
Only such that if we have board members' comments that we include them.
That's a point well taken. Are there any other? May I have a motion to approve? Second? All in favor? Minutes are approved. Thank you. Next is Committee on Finance. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 action items for board approval. The first action item requests approval to add, I'm going to get their name, mispronounce their name, I apologize, Sive, Paget, and Rizel, thank you, Commissioner Weisbrod, to the panel of the board, to the panel of board, I don't even know what that means, approved outside counsel. I'm off to a good start here this morning. The next action item requests the authorization of the MRT to escalator payments to Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties. And the last action item to be considered and recommended is the transfer of the 2018 TBTA operating surplus as described in the staff summary and resolution distributed at the Bridges and Tunnels and the Finance Committee meetings. The committee recommends these action items, and I move them.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? The action item carries.
Mr. Chairman, there are 2 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $3.7 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? They carry.
There are no competitive procurements and no ratifications this month. There are 3 real estate action items this month described on pages 72 through 77 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends the following 3 action items: the lease agreement with Inatome New York, Inc., the license agreement with Maple Drake Ostel Owner, LLC, and a modification to the ACOM contract for the concourse design. I move these items.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion on these issues? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? They carry.
Mr. Chairman, the committee also considered this past Monday the memorandum of understanding covering Penn Station improvements. The committee is moving the MOU to the full board without recommendation. Because there was a tie vote among the 6 voting members present at the meeting, I move the board consider this item for approval.
Is there a second? Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Weisbrot.
Yes, first I second, and then I, as one of those who had concerns about the item before the Finance Committee, those concerns, at least as far as I'm concerned, have been resolved. And thanks to the work of Jano Lieber, indeed, there is a commitment in writing that the state will provide, subject to legislative approval, the additional funds that are necessary for this project, this worthy project to go forward. So I will support the recommendation here.
Great. Is there any other comment on this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? This item carries.
This concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you very much. The next is Transit and Bus, and I chaired this month's Transit Committee meeting. There are 2 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $52.1 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them. There a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? These procurements carry. There are 2 competitive procurements for $3 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them. Second. Is there any discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? These procurement items carry. There are 6 ratifications this month for $9.4 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them. Is there a second? Any discussion? Mr. Weisbrot.
I won't repeat the reasons that I voted against these items or this ratification at the committee meeting, but I will vote against them here as well. I don't think that we should be engaged as of our former director, Scott Reckler's committee, accurately put it, engaged in scope creep and then see these items come back to the board after the work has been done. So for those reasons, I will vote against these ratifications.
Is there any other point of view to be expressed on this? I will express one. I support these ratifications because replacing steel members behind walls that have deteriorated and under platforms is not unimportant. We find those things in the course of our work all the time. Accordingly, I will vote yes, but it's time for a vote. All those in favor?
Can I just note, Mr. Chairman, that 50% of the additional costs here that are within this ratification are not for steel girders, but for expanded scope on items that were never part of the original bid. And it was only as an afterthought that they may have been quite worthy, but that they were included. They were not emergency items. And that's just, to my view, at a time when the MTA really should be looking to be very disciplined in how it contracts and how it contains its contracts within scope. This is just a blatant example of what it shouldn't be doing. So,
well, we obviously disagree, but time for a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The item carries. Thank you. And that concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report. Next is the Joint Railroad Committee, which will be made. I'm sorry?
Can I make one comment, Mr. Chairman, before we leave the Transit Committee? It's a positive comment.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say you said at the outset that the subway action plan has been a success, and I think that the data does indicate that it's made a lot of progress. And as I look back on a career in government, I recognize, as I think we all do, that a lot of what we do here is not a sprint but a relay, and that there are people who are responsible that should be recognized. And I do want to underscore that the Subway Action Plan was conceived when Joe Lota was the chair here, and I was one of those who was skeptical about some aspects of it, but that plan has proved to be successful, and I think in addition to current staff and management here, I think Joe deserves a lot of credit for implementing it, and I just wanted to say that for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Weisbrod. As always, we try to win over skeptics. The next report is the Joint Railroad Committee, chaired this Monday by Mr. Pally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I also, on behalf of the committee, want to express our deepest condolences to those who lost their lives yesterday. And I also, on behalf of the committee, want to thank the president of the railroad, his entire staff, all the labor union personnel who were there, all the first responders who were there last night at that terrible tragedy, and their ability to provide even limited service this morning is, from what I saw last night on TV, is almost a miracle. So I want to thank labor and management for making that happen, so that even a limited number of commuters from where I start in Ronkonkoma could get to Penn Station this morning. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Vinny, for on behalf of all the labor unions. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Pally.
The Metro-North Long Island Railroad Committees met jointly on Monday and reports the following. There are 8 competitive procurements this month for approval, 2 for Metro-North Railroad for $12.5 million, and 6 for MTA Capital Construction for $48.9 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Is there a second? It's been seconded. Is there any discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? The procurements carry.
There is 1 ratification this month for MTA Capital Construction for $1.3 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Is there a second? It is seconded. Is there any discussion on this ratification? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Ratification carries.
And this concludes the Joint Railroad Committee report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pally. Mr. Mack and then Mr. Brown.
Yeah, on behalf of my county executive, I echo your thoughts. Everyone's done a great job, president, union, law enforcement, but the preliminary report shows that these individuals tried to go unsuccessfully try to go around the rail guards to protect others, and unfortunately we had a tragedy. Again, thank you for all of your support. It was a terrible, terrible incident.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I guess I'm following David, which is, I guess, a privilege at this point. And, you know, condolences to everybody that died here. But I'd like to point out, which I'm going to every time this happens, that the entire expense of this tragedy is borne by the railroad. And this doesn't include the negative publicity as if it is somehow the railroad's fault that these guys went around the signals. Okay, so earlier on, somebody up here said, well, we got to separate grade crossings. Yeah, let's do that. But is that really an expense that should be borne entirely by the railroad and the MTA? These sort of incidences should be covered by the insurance companies that insure these operators of these vehicles. And there's no reason why the expense, and I don't know how you would ever calculate the negative publicity here, but it must be millions of dollars in negative publicity every time these things happen. It makes such huge headlines. And 3 deaths is a terrible thing. However, there's 3 deaths every Friday night, kids driving around in vehicles. The expense here is no reason it should be borne solely by the MTA, and while we're rewriting all of the MTAs, restructuring all these things in Albany, everything's turned topsy-turvy, maybe we could pass some legislation that would put some of the weight here on the operators of these vehicles.
Thank you. Let's go on to Bridges and Tunnels and Mr. Merdler.
Mr. Chairman, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met and I report the following. There are no non-competitive procurements. There are 2 competitive procurements in the total amount of $407,000. The committee recommends these procurements and I move them.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The procurements carry.
There are no ratifications, and this concludes the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Merdler. Next is Managing Director Ronnie Hakam, who will present a staff summary on performance metrics.
Thank you. Presented in the materials is a staff summary seeking your approval of proposed performance metrics for New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North Railroad as set forth in that attachment A in the materials.
I presume you've all had a chance to look at this, and we've discussed it in a pretty fulsome manner previously. I will ask if there is someone who wishes to make a motion. Mr. Schwartz.
I'd be proud to make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
And I'd be proud to second it. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I guess this will apply to all of the divisions, Transit, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. On these metrics and on delay reduction, if there are extenuating circumstances, and I'll use the R-179s as an example, where the supplier did not bring them to the agency in a timely manner, how will those reduction in metrics and the length of time, for instance, the R-32 fleet has to be utilized, how will those affect this?
I think those are great examples of exactly the kinds of conversations that would be had at the quarterly review, where the agency presidents would offer any context or remarks accordingly.
Thanks.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you, sir. I do think this is a step forward. I appreciate Mr. Schwartz promulgating this, and I appreciate management supporting it. I do feel, much like the way New York City Transit has for its weekday on-time performance, that the commuter railroads are missing, or at least in exchange perhaps, of a more pressing and telling metric than system-wide on-time performance. I have raised repeatedly the notion that the AM peak is the moment of truth, if you will, when the majority of commuters and the majority of the intensity is occurring. I believe the difference between on-time performance overall and the peak is material enough to warrant a focus on AM peak. I've also been inclined to focus on peak. There's a reason why it's called peak. We also have a reason why we charge more for peak. It is what matters to people more. I would like to submit the notion of either a replacement of the overall on-time performance or an addition of an AM peak item to Metro North and Long Island Railroad.
Mr. Schwartz.
Yes, I appreciate your input. Commissioner, I would ask that if it's possible, these metrics that I put together, because I thought it was important that as part of the overall reform efforts that we're doing, that we send a loud and clear message to the ridership that is part of our changing culture, that we're going to measure ourselves across all kinds of categories. These series of performance metrics, I thought were important, that if we're going to vote and act on a fare increase, that we need to give some kind of level of confidence and assurance to the ridership that things are going to continue to get better, even though Andy tells us at each and every meeting how things are getting better. I just think we need to institutionalize some of these metrics. I would ask, since this is not the be-all and end-all, and I've said to all the board members that it's an evolving process, that we can always add things that we think are relevant and pertinent. I also plan as Chair of Finance to ask the division heads to come in each month to give us an update, not just on the performance metrics, but also on things like fare evasion. I think we need to start to do things like CompStat and come in and just get regular real-time monthly updates. So I would beg your indulgence if it's possible, since I would like to include the division heads in any additional performance metrics. If you and we can have a conversation offline, and if everyone's on the same page, we can add it and have it ready to go for the next committee meeting.
You have my indulgence, you have my support, you have my appreciation for your leadership on this, and I do ask that my vote will not be held up by this topic.
Okay, if there's no one else, are we ready for a vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? This motion carries. Thank you very much. As you recall, last month, the board voted to defer consideration of a motion to approve fare changes until this meeting. We are now ready to consider the fare and tolls. The recommended changes are the result of months of planning, 8 public hearings, 4 video sessions, and the review of written comments from board members, the public, and just about everybody else who matters in this consideration. So at this time, I'd like to ask Monica Murray to present the recommended proposal. Ms. Murray.
Good morning. Okay, I'm here to describe to you the proposal you will be voting on in a few minutes. We'll start with New York City Transit. The recommended proposal is no increase for the base Metro card. That means no increase for paratransit, coin on bus, or single ride ticket. We propose to eliminate the bonus. The 30-day pass will go from $121 to $127. The 7-day pass would go from $32 to $33. Express bus, we have a slight tweak to that one. We propose to eliminate the coin on bus, accepting coin on bus. The base fare is currently $6.50. We propose to increase that to $6.75. And the 7-day Express Bus Plus would go from $59.50 to $62. Next is the commuter rail fare proposal. We propose for the commuter tickets a 3.85% increase for the weekly and monthly. The max dollar increase would be $15 on the monthly and $5.75 on the weekly. No increase on monthly tickets at or above $4.60. All other tickets would be a 4% increase on the base fare formula. If the percentage increase is greater than 6%, the dollar increase would be no more than 50 cents per trip. And for our West of Hudson customers, we propose a 0% fare increase. Lastly is our bridges and tunnels proposal. This is sort of a middle ground proposal. It's currently at $5.76. We propose a 36-cent increase, so that would be $6.12 on the major crossings. For the cars on the toll by mail, that would be a $1 increase, so from $8.50 to $9.50. For the for the New York City Customer Service Center trucks, the same percentage increase would be for cars, but for the toll by mail, we're proposing a $2 increase on the major crossings. For the Verrazano, the Staten Island resident rebate, we are proposing we would need another $6 million funding from the state to maintain that $5.50 toll. If there's no funding, the toll increases to $5.90. So that concludes the proposal.
Okay. You've all had an opportunity to review this. We've discussed this any number of times. Are there any, well, before I do that, I want to thank the members and our staff for their very hard and diligent work, especially the members who wanted to ask for greater clarity on these proposals and made some significant contributions to not only understanding where this goes, but forging a plan that is indeed, it's painful in some areas, but it is fair and it keeps us afloat financially, and that's an important thing. So I'd like to move this resolution. Is there a second?
Fair resolution.
The fair resolution. Is there a second? Is there any comment? Mr. Albert? Ms. Vanterpool?
I have quite a few things, so hopefully you'll bear with me. Obviously, we've heard from the public, and we understand that nobody wants a fare hike. That's pretty obvious. We also understand the system is in dire financial need and really, really needs a fare hike so that we don't go through the service cuts of 2012, which were more horrendous than many of us can even remember. It's obviously great that the Access-A-Ride fare is being held where it is. Those folks do not have access to the discounts that everybody else has, so until we have the new fare payment system, that makes perfect sense. I do question the doing away with the bonus, however, at a time when our ridership is dropping due to various reasons, be it the for-hire vehicles, be it all of the GOs that are going on, be it that the service is not, while improving, is not where we would like it to be. I question why we would then suck the best customers, those who are buying the bonus Metro card, and that is actually the New Yorkers who are economically challenged are buying the bonus Metro card as their card of choice. Why we would hit them with a larger fare increase than is necessary. But if we must do that, I would make the following recommendation. After attending the various fare hike hearings and hearing from more than one customer that many, be it because they're on an express bus or because they're on a train that was delayed, have missed a connection and had to be issued a three-legged transfer. I think to take some of the sting out of the fare hike, to make those transfers virtually a guarantee by having a 2-hour unlimited use of the Metro card after your first swipe. This would serve everybody from Staten Island to the Rockaways to Eastern Queens to the Northern Bronx. If they miss a connection, they do not have to be issued a three-legged transfer. They can use their existing Metro card swipe to transfer. If there's a problem on the line that you're currently on and you can walk to another line, you can do that without penalty. I just think having a 2-hour, which has been done in other cities, having a 2-hour unlimited use of the card after your first swipe virtually costs us nothing, because most people are going to continue to go to work the way they normally do. But if for some reason you have a delay, if you need to transfer, or if your express bus was caught on the Jersey Turnpike or the Gowanus Expressway, this gives you the option of a transfer without having to have personnel issue that three-legged transfer. So while I don't think doing away with the bonus is the greatest idea in this environment, until we have the service exactly where we want it to be, I think I would recommend the 2-hour swipe, the 2-hour usage after the first swipe, as a way of mitigating the sting of losing the bonus, and by recognizing that we hear our customers and that everything is not exactly where we would like it to be, but here's a little give back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albert. Ms. Vanterpool?
Thank you. Good morning. This fare and toll increase has essentially become a referendum on reform. People don't want the fare increase because of poor service, because of blown construction budgets that also go past deadlines, because of redundant operations and functions, because of a lack of clarity where the money is actually going, and because of agency dysfunction. But this vote is actually a fiscal vote. It's a vote about our operating decision. It's actually not a vote about reform. This is a vote to keep service running. This is a vote to keep people working. And this is a vote to keep new initiatives like that e-hail pilot program going. If we do not support this increase, we're going to have an even larger hole in the operating budget. And for someone like myself who has been pushing for new initiatives like phase 2 of this e-hail pilot program. We're not going to get there if we don't get this additional revenue. This is a decision to keep the day-to-day operations of this agency going forward. I'm very glad to be talking about reform. I'm glad that the governor has raised it. I'm glad that members of the state legislature have raised it. I even somewhat agree with some of the proposals that were put forth yesterday by the governor and the mayor around consolidation of agency functions, around even board member terms, even asking for an audit. But what we're not really talking about when we're talking about reform is some very common sense things. And I'm worried that this distraction, or rather this debate about reform, has become a bit of a distraction to what reform really is. So reform is a few of these things. Reform is aligning the fiscal year of the MTA with the state budget and the city budget cycles. It's a resolution that I put forth that has a good deal of support. We have asked for additional information from the MTA, which has agreed to provide it to us for further discussion and review at the March meeting. But that will rectify an irrational budget process. And it's irrational for a lot of reasons. But for me, it's irrational because we keep putting the riders first. We keep asking riders to put their contribution into our system first before we know what the state and the city is going to do. We have been doing this for a very long time, and as long as I've been on the board, which is almost 3 years now, I've been talking about this irrational budget process. We should not be putting the riders first, and we do it all the time. So it will be very interesting to see come March 31st what the state actually does on congestion pricing and all these new revenue sources. That's reform number 1. Reform number 2 is ensuring that the 7 state entities are actually, that oversee the MTA, are actually doing their job. We have an authority budget office. We have a New York City comptroller, a New York State comptroller. We have an authority, corps, and commissions committee in both the New York State Senate and the New York Assembly. We have a state legislature, and we have a governor who have not fully done their job overseeing the MTA. So all of the dysfunction and problems and challenges that we see now are in large part because those entities have not been doing their job. We do not need another 6-person panel on top of that. We need to fix those entities that are supposed to be doing their job. We need to open more data to the public and reform our FOIL process as an agency. If we opened more of our data, we probably have less FOIL requests. It is a huge concern for members of the press, from the advocacy community. That is one area of reform that nobody's talking about. We need to daylight our process on the Capital Program Review Board and the members. This body of 4 votes on our capital program. And nobody knows who the members are, nobody knows when they meet, nobody knows what the discussions are. That is a real change and reform that should happen. We should be talking about advancing accessibility in the system, which we have been, and President Byford has talked about that, as others. But we should be committing that priority with some significant funds in a way that we've not yet done. We need our elected officials to recommend members to this board that are more diverse than they have been. I should not be checking off 3 boxes as the youngest around this table, one of 3 women of color, and one of 3 women. Our elected officials need to be putting forth different candidates to this board. With great respect for the expertise around this table, we need different types of people sitting at this table that are not just representing our traditional areas of expertise of real estate, of law, of construction. We need others from this community around this table. That is true reform. We cannot be a two-faced agency, which is what we used to say back in the Bronx. Don't be two-faced. We cannot charge President Byford with coming up with a fast-forward plan, asking him to account and quantify the true capital costs of this system, and then saying, thanks, that figure, that number, too much, we're not going to pay. This $40 billion that you've put out, we think it should be $30 billion. We cannot be two-faced. That is not reform. And I want to close by saying true reform, board reform, agency reform, is giving this board authority to both hire our CEO and fire our CEO, appoint our board chair, and be involved either through advice and counsel of the selection of agency presidents. This process is unlike any other process of transit agencies around this country. That would give more accountability. So to hear discussion around reform and negate some of these points is disingenuous. Reform is not a 6-person panel. It is not one rider rep on this board. For any elected official that says they want one rider rep, you're focusing on the wrong thing. There should be 17 rider reps around this table. That should be your focus. So let's keep pushing on reform, but let's let this discussion not distract from some of the real reform that has to happen. And let's not confuse this vote, which is a fiscal vote, to keep people working, service going, and new initiatives in place with the reform that really does have to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Mr. Saul.
So the history of this 2% fare increase actually started back many years ago when I was the chairman of the Finance Committee. At that time, we used to be faced with years of no budgeting, no fare increase, and then all of a sudden we get this huge, humongous fare increase. So the idea was to put a consistent, basically inflation fare increase in, which was, we came up with the number of 2% a year. And I was a big supporter of this, big proponent, and actually pushed for it. But you know what? We've talked about all these reforms, and here I disagree with Veronica, but we've talked about all these reforms for many, many years. As you know, we spent a fortune, a tremendous amount of time putting this business center in, which was supposed to do exactly what the governor and the mayor proposed, which was to consolidate all the obvious functions like procurement and technology and all these things under one consolidated roof. But you know what? After all these years, I don't have any idea where the business center stands. As a matter of fact, I'm sure it's actually cost us more money because we staffed this whole thing up. And what's the results of it? Nothing. So now we're starting with all these proposals. We talked about consolidating the railroads. My God, this goes back to the 90s. It should have happened. So now we have this big proposal here on top of this fare increase again. And in my opinion, why should this really have any better chance than before? We all know, sitting around here, a lot of us have been here for a long time, and you know, this is a bloated bureaucracy. Just take a look at the building. There are thousands of people here, and frankly, we have archaic work rules. I think everybody, every working person deserves a fair wage here. There's not even a question about that. They deserve health care and all the benefits in a modern society. But you know what? This thing is full of waste. And as a fiduciary, to go vote, the riders are not getting a fair share here, and I've never said that before. But you know what? This has gone on too long. We have huge overruns on capital construction. We have huge overruns on overtime, and you get down the list. This place is not managed efficiently, and the riders are getting screwed, period. So for me, and I was the proponent of this 2% thing, I cannot, as a fiduciary, vote for this thing. I think it's dead wrong to throw this thing on the riders.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Mr. Pally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I hate to elongate the situation, but I need to do so on behalf of my constituents in Suffolk County. I want to make a motion to defer the commuter rail portion of the toll and fare increase motion so that this board can, and the public, can consider the alternative option and created by Commissioner Schwartz 2 months ago that unfortunately could not be considered at the public hearing because of the way the public hearing notice was written. I want to find out from my constituents and the other people who ride the railroad whether that other option is appropriate. Yeah. It provides the same amount of money to the MTA, so it's not an issue of revenue loss. It's strictly a matter of who would pay and who would not pay. It's important for me to find out from my commuters whether or not they would like an alternative plan other than the one that has been put out in this motion. And as a result of that, I think we need a full hearing before we provide for any commuter rail increase, and as a result of that, I would move that we defer from consideration in the original motion the commuter rail portion of the motion.
Is there someone going to second that?
I second that motion.
You do? All right. We've already had ample discussion on this. The chair recommends a no vote. Let's vote. All those in favor?
Are we voting on Mr. Palley's?
Mr. Palley's motion. All those in favor? All those against? Motion's defeated. Thank you. Okay. The resolution has been made and seconded. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mack.
Yeah, I think this is very important, and I am definitely for it. And I think that we need the money now.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr.
Thank you. I voted against Mr. Palley's motion, but I do think it has some merit. It's unfortunate that we couldn't consider several alternatives that did come up through the process. That said, I don't think it's appropriate to continue putting off the vote because it is costing us money one way or another. I do ask, however, that we have an opportunity to listen to alternatives. I know we only do this every 2 years, but that's our own rule. It doesn't have to be that way. I do think that we need to spend more time looking more carefully at the commuter railroads and the options that might be available to them. There have been a few suggested. I also acknowledge that, in fact, Mr. Rappaport acknowledged this as well. I think that the proposal that we have reflects many of the things that we heard in the hearings and that people brought forward and that committee members have been discussing. I will vote for it because I believe that we need the money right now and that there was a process that was pretty clear going forward. I think it needs to be improved, and I think we could still look at additional options. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not trying to belabor this either, but I think it's important that I explain why I voted no on something that I originally proposed so the press doesn't come asking me, Larry, why did you vote against your own proposal? And there's 2 points I just want to make. One is I'm in agreement we need the money now, and any further delays goes counter to that. Number 2 is, I think this could have been all avoided, and it's part of our reform efforts, that had we put together some kind of an internal working group a year before this vote was going to come up, it would have given an opportunity for us as board members to come up with revenue ideas, not just in terms of revenue ideas in the fare box, but other revenue ideas. It was something I had asked for and proposed a year ago. It didn't happen. It's why I got animated at the December meeting when just 2 options were put before the board. In essence, that's what it came down to, picking one of option A or option B. And I would ask, as part of our whole litany of reforms, that a year out prior to the next time that we're going to have to sit here and decide whether or not to approve a fare increase, that there is a working group assembled that can look at all opportunities to drive revenue. So maybe the last alternative is a fare increase, or we can get creative and innovative on how we structure future fare increases to kind of address some of the concerns and issues that have been raised by various board members. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That is a point well taken, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Ward?
I'm for the fare increase. I'm going to vote yes. I want to take a minute to talk about what Mr. Schwartz just said. I think that's a great idea. I think it would be terrific to put together a group of people to sit around and talk about how we grow revenue and how we try to identify other sources of revenue. It's clear that the only way we can make things managed today is by either making cuts, raising taxes, or raising fares. If those are the only three options available to us, then at some point we're going to continually be faced with the prospect of making some type of cuts. Whether those cuts are to staff, whether those cuts are to some sort of infrastructure program, at the end of the day, we can't cut our way out of the problems that we have. The only way we can solve our problems is to grow revenue. And if we can identify sources of revenue that don't come from fare increases and don't come from taxes, that's an absolute grand slam home run. I would love to see that committee formed, and I would be honored to sit on it.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you. I agree with the last two speakers. I do think the notion of a sustainable MTA is our biggest problem. This fare increase, which I do support and have said that repeatedly, is one that does not help solve the problem. In fact, all it does is keep us treading water, and figuring out the sustainable revenue model is our biggest risk besides some of our safety issues at the commuter rails. I do want to quickly explain my support with Mr. Powley. I would disagree with what Mr. Albert said a little bit ago. I would suggest that Putnam County, Dutchess County, and Suffolk County are our best customers. They spend anywhere from $430 to $520 a month for our service. They also then pay for a Metric card. I think 40% of them do. And then they park with us locally. They are our best customers because in the business world, those who spend the most are the best customers. This is an enormous paying segment of the population of which I am proud to represent. And so I do appreciate that we've institutionalized caps of $15. I appreciate that we've set a $460 limit, which I think helps a significant portion of Suffolk and Dutchess and affects one station in Putnam County. But it is a material burden on the people I represent. At the end of the day, I represent not just Putnam County, but all of the organizations. So therefore, I do support the fare increase because we do need the money. I do think, Mr. Saul, what you institutionalized many years ago is predictable and thoughtful. And frankly, I would push back at anyone who calls it a hike. 2% a year is not a hike. A hike is double-digit increases. So I do appreciate what you created many years ago as a gradual and acceptable increase. But it doesn't help the overall problem, and we must have sustainable revenues because, as Mr. Ferran has shown us many times, $1 billion bogey sitting out there in 2022 is a frightening deficit. That is bankruptcy for many organizations. And thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Brown.
It's my favorite meeting of the year. It's a great meeting to be a non-voting member. You don't have to vote for a fare increase, so I'm taking a position on not voting for a fare increase. However, I just want to try to put this in perspective here. Whether this is a 5% or a 2.5% or a 4% or a 4.5% increase is really, we're talking apples and oranges here because this is just to make service, what we call in the railroad to make service. This is just to put the trains together and put them out. It's not the world-class, world-comparable system that people want. And to get the resources for that, I suggest these painless things, if we imagine there's a painless way to do that, while the result is creating billions and billions and billions of dollars in real estate value, and we want the marijuana smokers to pick it up, or the people that buy from Amazon to pick it up. It's really, it's not that type of money you're talking about. The type of money you're talking about to do a world-class system is a lot of money, and it really is. It can't be done in a painless way. It can be done in a way that is connected to the MTA service. That's what we should be focusing on, not looking for something that is entirely painless. And granted, I'm not somebody that has to get elected. If you have to get elected, you'll have a different position probably on that, and then you'll want a painless solution. But a painless solution is not going to get us to a world-class system. So all the disabled people here that don't have enough, you'll have to choose between more stations for them and bus service in the transit deserts. That's the sort of choices you'll be making. And I suggest that's not really the discussion that's going on here. So we don't want a fair increase. We want these people to get a fair increase. That's a totally different discussion.
Is there anyone else? Commissioner Trottenberg.
Just to follow on what Norman said, unfortunately, you're right. There aren't painless ways to make sure that this great agency can continue its work, and I think that's why so many of us here are going to support this fare increase today. I think my colleague Andrew Saul put it well, and I've seen it in other systems around the country. When you get out of the regular habit of keeping up with inflation, then you find yourself suddenly at abrupt cliffs like New Jersey Transit did, where you have to raise fares sometimes even double digits. That is an actual hike. So I don't think anyone relishes this vote today, but I think it's important to keep this agency running.
Thank you, Commissioner Trottenberg. I appreciate that. Look, I want to acknowledge that last month we deferred a vote at the member's request. We were unready to do it. I'm not going to characterize any of the unreadiness. Ask time to look at alternatives, but I just want to point out that that deferral deprived us of $30 million in revenue. That will never be made up. So that's not to cast a pall over discussion and finding new ways. That's simply to give you a fiscal fact, and that fact is beyond dispute. It's not easy to support asking people to come up with more. But as part of a package where, and I trust people were paying attention, we are doing our part. We are serious about that. Where we step up, the riders step up in a way that's within inflation, the government, our funding partners step up, that's a fair system. And this vote reflects, I think, our appreciation of a fair system. If there is no other comment, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? This resolution carries. Thank you. Next, we'll consider the changes to the crossing charges for our bridges and tunnels as described in the materials before you. There are two staff summaries requiring board action. The first staff summary and resolution in the crossing charges package concerns a secret review conducted of the proposed crossing charges and the just and reasonable review. Materials relating to these matters, including the environmental assessment, the proposed negative declaration, and the just and reasonable report, were all distributed to the board members. By resolution, the board's approval and adoption is sought of, first, a finding that the proposed increases in crossing charges will have no significant adverse environmental effects. Second, the negative declaration, including authorization of the acting TBTA president or his designee to execute the negative declaration. And third, a finding that the proposed increases are just and reasonable under the Federal General Bridge Act. Do I have a motion to adopt this resolution? Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? There is one vote in opposition. This motion carries as well. The second staff summary and resolution in the crossing charges package seeks board authorization to adopt a new crossing charge schedule and authorizes the acting president of TBTA or his designee to take all steps necessary and desirable to establish, implement, and permanently adopt the new crossing charges schedule. Do I have a motion to adopt the resolution? Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? One in opposition, abstaining. This resolution carries as well. And now, may I have a motion to adjourn? Second. And thank you very much for your participation and your leadership. Meeting's adjourned. Morning, everybody. It still is morning. Who's first? Okay.
Mr. Acting Chairman, can you talk about, in terms of the cost savings that you've asked all the agencies to come up with, what does that translate into in terms of layoffs? And when would you know if those layoffs need to take effect?
That is a good question, and I'm glad you asked it because we're not talking layoffs at this point. And I wanted to knock that down. I appreciate your putting it on the table right now, right up front. What we're talking about is reductions that in management levels that we've shared with you previously by virtue of hiring freeze, hard hiring freeze, and vacancy control. So there's a freeze, somebody resigned, somebody retired, we're not automatically filling that vacancy. There's got to be a complete justification and rationale for it. We're looking at redundant operations across the enterprise and looking to consolidate those things. Looking to economize not only in those areas, but also in very important contracting out functions that involve procurements for services and supplies, as well as consultants.
So do you dispute, some have analyzed what you've asked for in terms of savings and said this won't bring you all the way there, and that ultimately, a couple of months from now, whenever, you will also need to actively reduce headcount?
I think you know me better. I don't engage in guesswork. I try not to read people's minds. I'll tell you what we're doing right up front. Marcia.
Mr. Chairman, I actually want to talk to you about congestion pricing. The plan that was put forth yesterday by the mayor and the governor would raise $22 billion if all the taxes are approved. And my question to you is that enough, given the fact that there have been estimates that it would take $60 billion to do all the things that you need to do? And then I have a second question.
Sure. I was on a number of commissions, but the last one was the Metropolitan Sustainability Commission, where there was a $60 billion figure discussed. Turned out that wasn't exactly what we were talking about. But anybody can throw out a number. $22 billion of recurring, reliable revenue would help us enormously to implement Fast Forward.
But is it enough?
We trust it'll be enough, and we're going to do everything we can, and we'll do our part to let me back up a second. We just implemented a fare and toll increase. It's painful for a lot of reasons for a lot of people, but we had to do it, and it was within inflation, so it wasn't exactly a mugging. However, that's in the context of all the other actions we are taking and have taken with respect to trimming down our own bureaucracy, living within our means. We have to step up as well as an institution, as an authority, and we're very serious about doing it.
So my second question is this. It has to do with Governor Cuomo, who has sort of been missing in action in terms of talking publicly to the press about his congestion pricing plan. He's, had, one radio show, but does not take questions in the metropolitan New York area about this congestion pricing thing. How do you feel about the fact that he's been MIA?
He doesn't seem like he's MIA. I see him all the time. Governor Cuomo has given us, I think, and Mayor de Blasio, important leadership on congestion pricing. This is a tough, troublesome topic for an awful lot of people. When I discuss it at home with my wife, it's tough and troublesome. But we've got to do it. And their leadership on this has made a very important contribution to advancing this conversation and adding much-needed revenue to our coffers.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is this. It's clear that you need to convince some, shall we say, recalcitrant lawmakers in the outer boroughs. And some would think that making the case here in New York City publicly helps to convince their constituents, which may get them to vote for congestion pricing. And do you think that leadership is missing?
No, I don't. I think they've made important assertions of leadership, both the governor and the mayor, letting people know where they stand on this. I trust that the governor is working in the legislature to let them know how important this is. We have certainly not been silent about how important this is. If we all want a reliable system that gets people from point A to point B safely, affordably, and reliably, we've got to take these steps. There are no half steps around it. Yes. And then
the 10-point plan announced yesterday referred to a regional transit committee, and it's something Board Member Vanderpool mentioned during the meeting today. What concerns from the MTA side that this could be another layer of bureaucracy that could impede the authority and some of the improvements it really does want to make?
Look, I can only do what I can do. It reminds me of a question I was asked when I was first being confirmed for membership on the MTA, asking me to opine about the mobility tax and what I would do about that. I said, you know, Senator, that's above my pay grade. Now, as you know, almost anything is above my pay grade these days. That's above my pay grade. That's what governors and legislators do. I can only tell you what we can do. And we're doing what we must do to get leaner, to put the MTA on a diet, to reform our own processes, and to reignite public confidence in us. This is too important a service, too vital an operation to play around with it and to make it the subject of a back and forth kind of game. Oh, I'm sorry, I went.
So Mitch Pally had made a motion to defer the commuter rail portion. Why do you not, sorry, Mitch Pally had made a motion to defer the commuter rail portion of it. Why did you not support that?
I did not support it because we deferred everything for a month. Everybody, every member had an opportunity to put forward their concerns, to study all they wanted to study. This is not about delay. We cannot afford delay anymore. That's why.
Is there a better is there a better alternative?
Yes, what we did. That's the better alternative. Yes.
Please forgive the housekeeping question, but I couldn't get an answer. When exactly will this go into effect?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it goes into effect in 30 to 60 days. Anybody know the answer to that? April 21st for the fairs and March 31st for the tolls. Oh, okay. Sooner than that.
April 21st for the fairs?
April 21st for the commuter fares? Yeah, and all the fares. And March 31st for the tolls.
Morning, Mr. Ferrer. Number 3 of the 10-point plan says MTA should be able to operate with mass transit fare increases limited to inflationary increases of 2% every year. Does that mean we might be seeing fare and toll increases every year, or are you sticking to the every other year thing? And what have you taken away from this process?
We've been doing it that way. 2% a year is 4% every 2 years. You know, people want to put that in a Cuisinart and meet every 6 months, that's okay. But count me out.
Hi. Could you put a bit more meat on the bones when it comes to the cost reductions? I believe from the press release, $500 million from each of the 6 agencies. So that's $3 billion.
I'll be even more
Could you give
specific.
like a timeline? Are we talking about over the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
No. It's in this calendar year. It's this and next quarter. $350 million in recurring expense operating budget savings. An additional $150 million in reimbursable operating budget savings related to the capital budget. This is serious.
For each agency?
Every agency expected to come up with a portion of that so that the authority as a whole meets that goal.
Sorry, meets the 500?
Yes, that meets the 500.
Okay. And then the other question then, just as a follow-up, is Mr. Farran in previous months has talked about the previous cost-cutting measures, and there have been a number of analogies about how the low-hanging fruit and the middle of the tree fruit is gone, or that we're very, very close to bone. So doesn't this push you towards the extreme top of the tree? Like, is there no fruit left? Are we at bone now?
Well, look, when contractors who contract with us are told, consultants, you're taking a 10% reduction in your hourly rates. Yeah, that cuts in, and there's a lot of unhappiness about that, but frankly, we're doing it. Yes.
Freddie, why dispute that you guys are talking about the possibility of layoffs when Bob Fran in that February 15th memo explicitly talked about the possibility of reduction in force?
People talk and plan. Planners plan about reductions in force, about a great many things. You're talking to the acting chair of the board and a member of this board. We have not implemented anything like that. We are not contemplating anything like that at this point.
Okay.
If the goal is to get cars off the road, why aren't the bridge and tunnel tolls higher, the increase higher than the ones that you've proposed today?
Well, they'll certainly get higher in their collectivity because we're talking about congestion pricing charges. So we want there to be some room there, and that's only fair.
The tolls are balanced against the congestion pricing charge. So there's not an increased deficit in driving into the city. If you pay the toll, that's discounted off of the congestion pricing fee.
I don't think we can have a chicken and egg argument about this. We can do what we can do today with respect to the toll changes that we've just put forward. Look, if there's something else that is required of us next time, we'll go through the process again. That's not a problem, but we also have to leave room, logically, for congestion pricing. And that's going to be part of the overall cost of driving a vehicle into the core of Manhattan.
The tolls are credited against the congestion pricing fee, according to the concept agreed to by the mayor and governor yesterday. So if the goal is to reduce car traffic in New York, and you've got the opportunity today to discourage car traffic in New York, my question is, why didn't you seize that opportunity and increase the tolls on cars?
I think some would argue a 6-point-something% increase in tolls especially is quite a lot. However, the larger point is New York City Transit, buses and subways, get excess revenue from TBTA. We just, part of our actions today, acknowledge the transfer of some TBTA funds to New York City Transit. We rely on that. So there's an important economic balance that we want to maintain as well. Someone I did not take first, and then I'll go back. Yeah.
Andy Byford is typically at these press conferences. I'm wondering, where is he?
I'll tell him you sent his regards.
Why isn't he here, and is that not evidence that he's been sidelined somewhat?
That's not evidence of anything other than I'm here.
I guess just to riff on that question, there were some concerns yesterday that reorganization proposed by Cuomo and the mayor would bring significant changes to construction and operations that could potentially impact Fast Forward. What do you make of that? Does that proposal, materially impact how Fast Forward would be carried out, who would carry it out, and Byford's role in it?
I think you have heard, even as recently as this morning's meeting, a reaffirmation of the board's support of Fast Forward and Andy Byford and his work. There's been no change in that.
What is the where do we stand in terms of getting the independent consultant on the L train project, and how, when it's been taking so long to get that on board, are you still confident that the main construction will start at the end of April?
Very soon, in the next couple of days. We'll have something for you. I'll get right back at you.
On FOIL reform mentioned by Vanderpool earlier, what's the MTA doing to open up and reform its FOIL process? And at that, what's it doing to open up its budget and data metrics on the data portals that are already existing?
Actually, I'm involved in a great many things. Answering FOIL requests is not one of the things I'm involved in, but I'll get an answer for you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we're going down this way. Next.
The Senate Majority Leader has come out against congestion pricing. Long Island senators are against it because there's no investment for the Long Island Railroad. Is that something you would consider as part of a congestion pricing plan, sending some of that money for major investments in Long Island?
I want to see what the legislature comes with first. That's going to be the prerogative of the governor and the legislature. If I wanted a voice in that prerogative, I would have run for governor or senator or assemblyman. I'm a member of the MTA Board. Once they have decided what they are going to do, we'll respond in an appropriate way.
Thank you, sir. Could you comment or share your thoughts on what Ms. Vanderpool's remarks were with regards to more diversity amongst the board and your thoughts on term limits?
Well, let me do the second one first. The term limit issue, I'm for that. Again, that's in the law. The governor and the legislature will figure that out. They've already said that certain terms should sunset when their appointing authorities leave office. I support that. More diversity on the board. I have, among other things I've done around here, has been chairman of its diversity committee. So there are issues, and you know who I am and what I am. So there are issues concerning representation of women, people of color, people with disabilities, veterans, in all the work that we do that I feel strongly about. I cannot feel any less strongly on the board. But again, that's something that it's a concern that needs to be voiced, and the people who are in charge of that, making appointments and confirming those appointments, need to hear that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Hi, my question is going to be in Spanish. La primera es, ¿cuál es el mensaje que tiene para la comunidad, gente que obviamente no está de acuerdo con que se suba el precio del pasaje y que ahora, una vez más, ven esto? ¿Valió la pena retrasar el voto un mes?
Seguro que sí. Es un aumento relativamente pequeño. Y eso es importante entender. Un aumento de más o menos 2% anual bajo el rate de inflation, para mí es sumamente razonable.
¿Y cree usted que...?
Y si queremos el servicio, estaciones limpias, trenes limpios, autobuses que funcionan, hay que pagar por eso.
Con este nuevo plan de aprobar el pago por congestión o congestion pricing,
Sí.
¿cree usted que esto es una manera de castigar a las personas que viven en desiertos de transporte? O?
No es un castigo, es una manera de levantar los fondos necesarios para poder mantener este servicio clave, no solamente en la ciudad de Nueva York, sino también en esta región.
¿Pero qué sucede con aquellos que ahora van a pagar más a pesar de que no tienen un servicio de transporte en su vecindario?
Y a la misma vez no tienen el derecho de causar tráfico en las calles. Eso es importante también. Yeah.
What would you say to lawmakers who oppose congestion pricing, the marijuana tax, and the internet tax that are proposed, and how those not passing may affect the subway?
That's a really good question. I would ask them to think very hard about the kind of system of public transportation they want. Now, it's easy to say, well, get rid of the fraud, waste, duplication, and abuse. Okay. We're making demonstrations that we're doing that. After all that's done, what else have you got? We're going to have to pay for this. And let's put it clearly on the table. PTC to prevent, positive train control, to prevent crashes on commuter railroads. We are required to do that by the federal government, a requirement we accept gladly. However, that costs money, $1 billion. No one's putting it in our pockets. We've got to pay for that. I think it's an investment that's worthwhile to make, but we've got to pay for it. New subway cars, new signaling, clean stations, stations that don't fall apart. Those are all things we pay for. All of us. We all do, because I'm a member of the riding public too. People expect us to do that, and that costs money. The men and women who clean our stations and maintain them, who maintain signaling, who drive the buses, who operate the trains, they deserve to get paid as well. That's where it goes.
There's really one more question. So just the head of the Senate majority, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, on behalf of herself and the Long Island delegation of senators, just put out a statement like seconds ago saying that they're opposed to the congestion pricing plan because it's heavily weighed towards fixing the subways and doesn't do enough for the commuter rails, both Westchester, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. How much of an impediment is that going to be to getting congestion pricing? And secondly, do you think that the way the congestion pricing plan is weighted should be changed to give more money to the commuter rails?
Look, not worth, and frankly, not appropriate for me to get into the middle of a debate that is properly held in the legislature and with the governor. However, I would ask everybody to think about what kind of system we want. Do we want a system that doesn't break down, that is reliable, that continues to be affordable, and that moves people from point A to point B safely and on time? That's the kind of system I want. So I would urge people to be very careful about this and consider it well.
But see, if you have a $22 billion pot of money, it would be up to you and the MTA board to decide how that $22 billion will be spent.
Not completely. In fact, we have 6 or 7 oversight authorities. Let me enumerate a few of them. The Public Authorities Control Board, represented by mayor, governor, and legislature too. They have veto power over all of those things, over all those capital projects. There's the state controller, the city controller, the authorities control. There's a bunch of them. We don't make unilateral decisions here. Everybody correctly looks over our shoulders, including all of you, and that should happen.
So I just wonder, though, if you think that given the arguments that they're making and given the fact that you'd like to have them on board to get congestion pricing, if you should consider in your lobbying efforts reapportioning some of the money to address their concerns.
See, I'm not the one who puts bills before the Senate and Assembly. So, again, way above my pay grade. What I can tell them is we need the money. We've got to be able to deliver on the plans that we're putting forward that everybody says they support. Everybody says, we want fast forward. We support Andy Byford. Well, that's going to cost some money. Oh, well, I don't know. No, we've got to know. We've got to come up with the resources we need to re-signal an antique signaling system to fix subway stations that, by the way, when you begin to open the walls like you do in any renovation project, you find, rotting steel members that actually support structures. Those are things you got to fix.
I wanted to ask about the base fares. 2 questions, one of which is, why not just take the accessoride fare and separate it from the base fare so you don't have to worry about jamming paratransit riders with a hike, and you separate it from the base fare. But my question is then, why did the board go ahead with freezing the base fare if it was going to raise the rates by nixing the bonus, increasing the unlimited, and as MTA board member Andrew Albert said, hit those who are low income, who use the bonus, and they're the MTA's best riders, best customers.
If I agreed with the premise that they are the MTA's best customers, the people who got the bonus, I might have seen it that way. I do not.
Okay, they're 40%.
Well, I'm not
They're 40
debating you. You asked me a question. I don't agree with that. But that's only my vote. The important issue here is the fare's got to get raised in a relatively equitable way. The least painful way to accomplish that was what we put forward to the board. An overwhelming majority of the board agreed with that.
Say least painful to who? What are we talking about here? What kind of pain and how is it spread?
Least painful to everybody.
How much longer is the MTA going to be in a state of emergency and at a time when there's all this talk about cutting costs and needing to save bucks? Doesn't that just create openings for more unchecked spending on contracts?
Okay. Are you talking, what are you talking about specifically? Because I'm trying not to read between the lines.
Well, today, Mr. Weisbrod talked about some adjustments to a contract and cited that as
the ratifications for, okay. We disagreed with it. Now, you know, they involved a number of things. Change orders, largely for $9.1 million. They involved replacing rotted steel members in subway stations. I don't think anybody can dispute that. Somebody might say, well, you know, part of it's wayfinding. Do we really need signs? Yeah, tell that to a customer, to a rider who's going through it, doesn't know which way to go. So we're doing, you know, we're not building anybody a back porch. We're doing things that are necessary for the smooth operation of our system. And these are consistent with contracts we put forward before and rationales we've made in the past. Thank you.
We're going to have President Phil Ag come up and do an update on the collision from last night.
Oh. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Just a little bit of an update with regards to the status of the ongoing incident response. As everyone is aware, you know, our men and women worked tirelessly through the evening. We're very proud that we were able to restore limited rush hour service for this morning on a single track. That was a big effort, but it was important because even with limited service, there were thousands of people that were able to take the train that would have had to find alternate ways, and as we know, putting them in the vehicles and cars is not what we were looking to do. So we're very happy that we're able to provide that. Having said that, the next step is now that the AM rush hour is over, we did inform the ridership that during the midday we will be closing both tracks again to allow the effort to re-rail the remaining cars and to try and extricate them from the area. That's a challenging effort because of the platform and the situation of the trains. But with the crane and the outriggers, we're using that to stabilize, and we're going to work through the midday to take care of that. We are ready to shortly issue an afternoon PM rush schedule. It's going to be very similar to this morning's. We anticipate it'll be about 12 cancellations. And then we'll also add 4 additional trains along the Babylon branch to try and take some additional capacity. And there will be no westbound trains in response to the single track still through the Westbury area. Post PM rush, which will be somewhere around the 9:30 time frame, we will look to, again, take the second track out, allow our folks to continue to go full bore, and do everything that we can to work around the clock to try and restore service. I know there were some questions with regards to the platform. That's been evaluated. You know, we'll be able to, once service is restored, we'll be able to safely cordon off a good portion of that platform and still be able to use that station.
Phil, do you anticipate that tomorrow morning will also be canceled trains and a single track, or is it too early to say? When do you think you'll be at 100% service?
Well, it's too early to say because a lot of the uncertainties right now rely on the rerailing process. The team is out there now. Part of the challenge is one of the tracks is rolled sideways, so part of the rerailing would be easier if the tracks were in the upright position. But the rec crew is very experienced. They're going to do an iterative process, working through it, removing some of the trains that are on the tracks to make the effort smaller and isolate the problem. So that effort will go in place. Once we have a better handle on that, then we'll be able to fully assess the conditions of the track, the conditions of the third rail, and we'll be able to provide a better time frame. Having said that, we are providing Protect buses for tomorrow morning. We'll have them along Huntington, we'll have them along Ronkonkoma, and along Babylon. And currently, right now, during the midday, we have shuttle buses running from Hicksville to Mineola to provide that service.
Phil, despite the best efforts of yourself and Metro North, there seems to be people who try to push their luck and go across grade crossings. Is there anything that can be done? Is it a better education campaign? Is it putting, bars that go completely across the crossing? I mean, what's the answer to these continued incidents?
Well, Marsha, it's an unfortunate situation. It is a tragic situation. Why folks try to risk their lives and other people's lives, perhaps to save a few minutes, is one that I can't answer because I would never put myself in that situation. But I can tell you that MTA, Long Island Railroad, and our sister agencies are very focused on safety. We do a lot of effort, not only through MTA PD, our safety office, but also with local law enforcement and education. And a lot of effort also in schools. We go to elementary schools, we go to high schools, because really what we need to do is educate people, not just now when they're adults, but we need to educate them when they're children, because that's where it's formative stage. There is a very proactive effort with that, and we're going to continue that effort in terms of just taking a look at engineering solutions, enforcement solutions, and education.
So are there engineering solutions that you have to look at now?
Well, we're continuously looking how to evaluate safety and proactively prevent these types of incidents. That's certainly part of our inclusive look.
Phil, I remember there was a big push on the education front, the engineering front. There were some tragic crashes of people in the grade crossings. Did you ever look at and have a decision on an engineering solution that that prevents people from completely entering the tracks with any kind of vehicle? And if so, why not? Why not? And could that even be implemented?
Well, I know that we have looked at other measures in the past. One of the things that we are trying to balance is the need to be able to ensure whatever mechanism we put in not only safely prevents vehicles from being able to cross the tracks when the gates are down, but also allows them to exit when the gates are down. And I know there's been other discussions, can you do something more more definitive that blocks the entire crossing. I think all of that is something we put on the table and we continue to look at. There's other new technology that could that we'll investigate in terms of identifying objects perhaps on the track that we need to look at. So technology is ever changing. The railroad has obviously a long history of systems that have been built up over time, but with regards to grade crossings, it's an area that we're focused on. We have 296 of these grade crossings. Some of them will be eliminated in the very near future, and that's all part of a all-inclusive approach.
Just to follow up real quickly, was that location, the Westbury Station, did it ever receive any kind of engineering upgrades going back to when this issue kind of came to a head? I think of not last year, 2017.
Well, with regards to preventing folks from going around the gates, it's really been the effort with regards to education, enforcement, and engineering. With regards to grade crossings in general, I think I've spoken about it at length with regards to the effort we did with flexible reflective delineators and working through ways as identifying them as hazards. And that really has been beneficial because back in May of last year, we had seen that number of accidental turns on tracks growing, and it was 21. The year before was 29. Since we've done that effort, we've had 0 accidental turns on tracks. So there are ways that we're going to continue to tackle this, and And one of them is obviously, again, trying to educate people at the right ages and you know, realize that they should not be taking those risks, because that whatever went through that person's mind is tragic to them, their families, and the folks that were with them.
Mr. Eng, on the fare increase for the Long Island Railroad, what would you say to the commuters who already complain about service, that it's not up to par, and now they have to pay more for it?
Well, since I first started, a big part of my effort has been to engage with the commuters. As a fellow rider, I have been engaging not only through plan forums, but I've been engaging every day of my commutes in both directions. We've also had a lot of our senior managers on a daily basis now talking to the commuters about what their needs are. So what I've been trying to do is obviously focus on the things that have been impacting their commutes daily, and that's those signals, the switches, things that are failing and causing delays, including low bridges, including gates, and trying to focus on ways to make the environment better for them in the stations and in the cars. At the same time, we've been very dedicated at the Long Island Railroad to make sure that we actually try to find ways to keep the projects on schedule. As we heard at the board, a lot of talk about past projects not being delivered on time, not being delivered on budget. I'm proud to say that the railroad has embraced alternative procurement. The third track was using design, build, best value. So was the second track. Second track, we delivered 15 months ahead of schedule. I think that is a testament to our commitment to building infrastructure that actually supports the railroad's ability to provide better service. That double track along the Ronkonkoma branch allows us the ability to go around switch issues, signal issues, when in the past that would have actually resulted in a service suspension. So it really is a balanced effort with regards to making sure we treat things today with a new sense of urgency, a get-it-done attitude, and then as well make sure that we find ways to be creative and deliver a balanced program, because we do need to build for the future. We're seeing a growing ridership on Long Island, and last year's numbers show it.
Would you say they could expect a 4% increase in service for the 4% increase in fare?
I would say that my goal is to provide them the best service we can. It's to continue ensuring that we tackle the issues that are causing the problems for them. I would say that the trends that we're seeing since the latter part of 2018 into 2019 is demonstrating that we are moving in the right direction, that the on-time performance has shown that many of the issues that had plagued us before we are taking care of, and the things that we can't control, like for instance in this incident like last night or Mother Nature, we're better prepared to respond to those incidents. And we've had a lot of weather events, maybe not nor'easter snowstorms, but we've had tremendous wind, we've had tremendous events where the weather would turn from rain to freezing sleet to snow, back to rain and sleet. And through the windstorms that we had just the other day, you know, that's another proactive method that we did with regards to vegetation overgrowth clearing and working with our partners at PSEG and removing the things that had actually caused a lot of delays and suspensions like we saw last night, where a tree crosses across all the tracks, a utility pole across all the tracks. Since we started, none of the tree incidents have come from trees on our right-of-way, nor have any utility poles have fallen along our right-of-way. So these are all things that are trending to say to our customers, we're committed to providing better service for them, and we are incrementally doing it. It's a step-by-step process, but it's continuing to build on the successes, and we are seeing signs that it's going in the right direction.
Board Member Brown made a comment during the meeting about possibly passing some sort of legislation that would put the cost, or at least some of the cost, like incidents like last night, back onto the driver or probably the family of the driver. What's your opinion of that statement? Do you think that's a realistic thing that can be done?
I actually asked the team earlier this morning to look into ways to recoup costs. So we're investigating all options with regards to incidents caused by others and how those costs should be borne by others that result in those costs that are being borne by us currently.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Phil.